Hi everyone and welcome back to the Chemist Couple podcast with your hosts Lee and Jess. Now this week we are going to be discussing the things that we're going to act upon in regards to our results that we revealed last week. And as always, thanks for anyone that does listen, and if you haven't already, please subscribe on whatever platform you are listening to this podcast on. And as always, this podcast is not medical advice and should not be used in substitute to seeing a registered healthcare provider. Now, this week we will focus on just a couple of things that we're going to implement, because if we change too much of what we were doing, we wouldn't know what was benefiting us in any way, really.
Yeah.
So what would we like to focus on?
So mainly our cholesterol levels, isn't it? And also our APOB, which is a marker of cholesterol.
Yeah.
Specifically the bad cholesterol, or the cholesterol that causes atherosclerosis and increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. But like you say, I think it's actually probably a good one to do, because we're coming to the end of December now. Obviously it's starting with a new year, and so all of the things that we will actually discuss in the podcast are going to be beneficial just for our overall health anyway. So even though, like we say, we're discussing specifically to do with our cholesterol levels and trying to improve them, it will just improve your overall health if you do follow some of the things that we are going to say. Would you agree?
I mean, your BMI, body fat percentage, all them things will improve if we do act upon this thing that we are going to be doing. Now, my APOB, do you remember what yours was?
Yeah, so mine was 85. If I remember correctly, but above, it's between 30 and...
It's the 30th percentile, yours?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
you're going to do
like
the reference range?
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
So the reference range was between 30 and, was it 180?
I think it was 170, 175-ish.
Yeah, so mine was 85. And like you say, I was in the 30th percentile, which means that 70% of people
will have a worse off
result. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was the 80th percentile, or just shy of that, and obviously the inverse of what you are.
Yeah.
Now, the things that we've looked into, we've looked at a lot of podcasts and other medical sort of studies that are out there, and there is a consensus at the moment that the two main ways to act upon your ApoB, which is the main one we're going to be looking at, is to reduce dietary carbohydrates and to reduce dietary saturated fats or fatty acid consumption. Now, there's this consensus that exercise doesn't really have much of a role to play, and there's not really, too much out there on the microbiome and its involvement.
Yeah.
So I know you've looked into the microbiome,
and
I'm going to let you lead this part. I'll ask you questions, and I need to clarify, as well as anyone listening, what involvement it's got in lipid metabolism and utilisation.
Yeah, so I had a look at the gut microbiome. I do like looking at the gut microbiome, actually, because I think it's a very important part of our overall health. So it's commonly now being known as like an endocrine system in its own right. So we're at the very beginning of learning about it, and there's still a lot more that we have to learn. But however, there are some studies that I did look at in terms of specifically with cholesterol. So if we think about the gut microbiome, there's three main ways in which the gut microbiome helps our cholesterol management, or decreases the amount of cholesterol that is absorbed from the diet, or helps us metabolize cholesterol in a better way. So the first one is the fact that some microbes in our gut actually cause cholesterol to be converted into something called, let me just have a look with Coprostanol. So Coprostanol is a compound that is insoluble, and we cannot absorb it through our gut. So if cholesterol is converted to this product, it's then just excreted in the feces. So by default, it then means that we're not absorbing as much cholesterol from our diet, because it's just passing right through us. Now, we do know that only about 10% of cholesterol is actually absorbed from our diet. So if it's only based on dietary cholesterol, which is how that works, it may not have such a beneficial effect. However, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, even if you allowed your gut microbiome to be more diverse, which would increase the amount of gut bacteria that could produce this compound, it's only going to benefit your overall health anyway. Yeah,
and the medication that it relates to is normally ezetimibe, and that still has a profound effect on lipid profiles anyway. So it is benefit.
Yeah, so that's one way. Then the second way is by entrapment. So a little bit of a background into cholesterol. So cholesterol is involved in a lot of different things in our body, one of them being it's incorporated into cell membranes. Bacteria do have cell membranes, but they also have a cell wall, and so bacteria don't actually need cholesterol within their structure like we do. So a lot of bacteria don't actually contain cholesterol. However, there are some species of bacteria that entrap cholesterol. So the mechanism by which they do this and why they do it is not fully understood, but they think that they do it to basically allow them to not be broken down as easily. So it increases the their ability to live longer. You know, and everything in biology is all about trying to increase your chances of survival. And so this is what they think is the reason for why bacteria do this. Now, an example of a type of bacteria that does it is lactobacillus. So we know that is included, or it's the bacteria that is incorporated into sourdough, which ferments the sourdough. But yeah, so it entraps the cholesterol, again, absorbed from that is in our diet. So within our gut, it entraps the cholesterol. And again, if obviously you're entrapping the cholesterol within inside the bacteria, then we can't absorb it. And so then it will hopefully reduce cholesterol levels. So that's the second way. And then the third way is probably the most mechanistic way. And so it's the one that's most involved in not just the actual dietary cholesterol, but also the metabolism of cholesterol. So cholesterol, so just to like take a step back, sorry. So our liver produces bile salts. So bile salts are to aid digestion. So the liver produces bile, it's then stored in the gallbladder, and then it's released into the intestine. So when we eat a meal, bile will be released, and then it helps food be broken down so that we can absorb it. So like I said, bile actually contains cholesterol. So our liver, depending on whether you're eating a meal or whatever, it'll need to upregulate and produce more bile. By producing more bile, you're then going to take more cholesterol from the bloodstream, so less cholesterol is available to then be transported to the blood vessels to then, you know, cause atherosclerosis down the line. So then what happens is that once the bile acids have been used, we then usually reabsorb it, and then it goes back to the liver to be then either the cholesterol's taken, it's broken down, and then it'll either go out into the bloodstream, or it'll then be cycled into bile salts and then go back into the gallbladder to be stored. However, there are gut bacteria that convert bile acids into what we call secondary bile acids.
Okay.
Now, usually what happens is bile acids, once they are reabsorbed, it signals to the liver to basically stop making bile. So we don't need to make any more. However, secondary bile salts decrease this. So by decreasing this feedback mechanism, it means that more bile will be formed. So then more cholesterol is pulled from the bloodstream, so less is likely to then get stuck in the arteries. So did I explain that okay? Do you understand that? Yes.
No, I do, yes. So there's actually medication that act in a similar way, but not via the secondary hormone. So you've got cholestyramine, which binds to bile acid salts, and then, like you said, it's got to upregulate bile acids production, and then it pulls it in from the rest of the body. Yeah,
so they're the three main ways. Now, there are a lot of other different ways in which it can regulate cholesterol. So I have a study which I'll link down below, because the science behind it is very complex, and so I'm not going to go into any more, but I think them three things that I've said are the most relevant, and they're probably the most easy to understand. And like I say, if anybody wants to read more into it, then I will leave the link down below. But in order to sort of allow these mechanisms to happen, we need a good, diverse gut microbiome. And as we know, people in the West, in the diet that we eat, it's not really favourable to increasing the diversity.
It isn't, but when we looked into anything to do with polyphenols and supplying the microbiome, there's not so much a dosage on how much of certain plants you should have, and I like to know how much of something you can have with working in farms, you know, them other things. So for an example, they say to have 30 plants a week.
Yeah.
How much of each plant should you have? So for example, how much coffee should you have? How much paprika, all these things, is there an amount?
So not that I've seen there is an amount. However, when you talk about coffee, for instance, coffee does increase the diversity of the gut microbiome. So they did studies in coffee drinkers, and they had a more diverse gut microbiome, and actually it was correlated to the amount of cups of coffee that somebody drank. Okay. So the more cups of coffee, the more diverse. I don't know what I in that study how many cups a day they went up to, because obviously if you're having too much caffeine, we know that can be detrimental to your health.
Well, I was going to say 400 milligrams a day is give or take.
So I don't know, but I think if I remember correctly, when they were saying comparing between 2 cups a day to 4 cups was like sort of what they were testing, and it did the diversity did increase between 2 and 4. So it is dose dependent. But yeah, with regards to other ones, I don't know. This is the answer. But I think, again, like I say, if you are... So, for instance, in our diet, because plants also don't have to just be vegetables or fruit. It can be spices, it can be legumes, it can be nuts, it can be seeds. So they're all classed as plant-based products and things that are going to aid with diversity of the gut microbiome. So, of a morning, I will cook with paprika. Literally just a teaspoon. I'll cook with a teaspoon of turmeric. I'll then obviously top our breakfast with mixed nuts and seeds. So by doing all of that, you're just adding more and more plants in without it, without even really knowing about it, because if you just put a spice in, it could be any spice really, and it just changes that flavour profile, it makes it more interesting, and then you're just getting more of the plant within the week. So like you say, 30 is what we usually aim for.
That's
30
the number,
different
isn't
species. It? Yeah. And to be honest, I don't know whether that's science-backed. I'm not sure, or whether it's just sort of a good marker, because it's a round number, and it's probably easy to get 30 plants within your diet over the week. It's not like unobtainable.
Yeah, but when you're starting from nothing, it actually can be quite complex.
Well, yeah, and also when you are starting from nothing, because obviously the reason why we advocate for having more plants is because plants contain a lot of fibre. So going back to before when I said about the Western diet and why we have a less diverse gut microbiome, is because we tend to eat a lot of ultra-processed foods which avoid almost completely of fibre. So, the gut microbiome feeds on fibre, and that's what, allows it to flourish. If you are eating a Western diet, it's mainly ultra-processed foods. So if you then go from one extreme to the other and start to incorporate more plants, you may experience bloating, you can experience diarrhea or constipation. And so it's just important to note that it may be best to start off slow and then slowly and gradually increase, because you can get And
that's with anything in life. If you start going to the gym, you don't go all out, because you'll get really, delayed onset muscle soreness, and then you won't go back to the gym for the rest of that week. So I would up-titrate your diet.
Yeah.
And from the very few facts that I know about the microbiome, if you think about the amount, this is how I was trying to put it into layman's terms the other day. When you think of bacteria, it's very small on a microscopic level. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a grain of cinnamon or a grain of paprika, that's probably going to feed quite a lot in terms of a volume and area. So a teaspoon, a tablespoon of spices can go a long way. Mm-hmm. So it is just incorporating them in any way that you can. Yeah. And when you've touched upon the ultra-processed foods, when we did start this, looking into science and the microbiome a bit more, 12 months ago, give or take, yeah. Yeah, we actually looked at the spices within the cupboard, and we actually found that a lot of them did have preservatives and other
gums and things like that. So just again, it's something that you would never even think about that contains or it's not an ultra-processed food, but they can be.
You would think that they were inert and natural, but a lot of things that we have in diets, mainly due to cost, economic reasons, have been modified in such a way to make it more financially viable for people to live off, really.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do then going forward with our diets? Because for anyone who doesn't know, we have quite a lot of plants.
Yeah.
I'd say in between August and the last couple of months, our plants within the diet have probably reduced. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that we need to act upon, because the microbiome is clearly involved within lipid metabolism, and if you can maximise the efficiency, it's going to improve your health no matter what. Yeah.
So I think the thing that we need to do is increase the diversity of the plants that we're having, because actually if we do look at what we're eating at the moment, it's very similar every day. It's like I say, it's like there's about 5 spices that are used during the week. I don't really go outside of that. The same with the amount of vegetables that we have. It's very the same every single week. So I think just increasing the diversity is probably the best place to start, because plants contain fibre, but they also contain polyphenols, and different plants contain different polyphenols, which are also beneficial. So they are converted to bioactive compounds that they interact with every single different system within the body as well. So again, not just for cholesterol, but for overall health, just increasing the diversity, you're getting different polyphenols that you're going to be able to, convert into different compounds. So that's probably the first thing. And then there's also other things that you can do. So increasing the amount of prebiotics. So prebiotics are not to be confused with probiotics. Probiotics are actual live microorganisms, where prebiotics are actually fibre that feed the gut microbiome. So they're called oligosaccharides.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so they're an example of a prebiotic. So any food that contains that is classed as a prebiotic. Then also eating foods that contain live bacteria, so fermented foods such as like natural yogurts or miso. We have a lot of kimchi and sauerkraut, also sourdough. They contain live microorganisms, and so they're good for your gut microbiome as well. And then also like getting a good night's sleep we know that actually can increase the diversity of the gut microbiome, and then also exercise. And then one last thing that I just wanted to touch upon was alcohol. So when actually I did look at research into how you improve your gut microbiome and how you increase the diversity, alcohol wasn't actually mentioned. So smoking was, and it said avoid smoking because it's linked to poorer, diverse gut microbiomes, but alcohol wasn't mentioned. And for me, and we discussed this in the alcohol podcast.
In terms of sterilisation and other procedures?
Yeah, so you would think that it would sterilise the bacteria, the protozoa, the fungi, everything within your gut microbiome, and so it would make it less diverse, but it wasn't mentioned. But just to touch upon that, I have actually decided anyway to go sober for 3 months. So at the moment I'm 5 weeks into that, it's been fine. Like I say, I don't really drink that much anyway. It's only very sociable.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're at Christmas, very difficult to do because it's probably the most sociable time of the year. But I feel like the reason I did it was because if I can do it now, I can do it anytime. But yeah,
going back to, you just said illegal saccharides being a prebiotic.
Yeah.
Now that just sort of drew up a problem with people who've got IBS because they follow a FODMAP diet.
Sorry, yeah.
So then anyone who's got IBS who's listening to this, they're going to find it hard to increase the amount of plants and fibre within the diet because this is going to trigger off spasms and diarrhea or constipation, whatever it is, because that's IBS.
Yeah.
So how do you go about?
The only thing that I would say about that is that I was diagnosed with IBS when I think I was about 12 or something like that, and I was put on Metabolism, I was put on the peppermint oil capsules, and nothing seemed to work. And if I'm being honest, since I've changed my diet and changed my lifestyle, I really get bloated, very rarely. And if it is, it's usually down to stress.
Okay.
So I actually think that probably the reason for me having IBS in the first place was, I think it was stress, because we know that it is linked to it.
Trigger.
But I think it was also probably to do with my diet, and actually probably ultra-processed foods meant that my gut microbiome wasn't as diverse, and so I was having the symptoms of IBS. So I think although it may be detrimental in the first instance, actually in the long run it probably will help. And again, like we just said, maybe start off slow and then slowly increase it. But it is difficult because I know my nan suffers with Crohn's. It's different. Yeah. It's not like IBS and it's an autoimmune disease. However, she can't have a lot of food like vegetables and fruits because it makes it worse. Because we know obviously they produce gas. Like if you are eating foods with a lot of fibre, it just allows fermentation to occur. So it does. So it's a balance. It really is a balance.
It's individualised like medicine and anything in healthcare.
Yeah.
And there are going to be potential drawbacks to increasing the microbiome diversity and increasing it in number because, again, the class is the good bacteria, commensal bacteria, but it is still bacteria at the end of the day. If it does enter your bloodstream in certain amounts, it will or has the potential to cause disease.
Yeah.
However, if you do look after your health, that risk should be completely reduced.
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch upon that.
So actually, just touching upon that as well, one of the other things to actually increase your gut microbiome, but also to decrease the risk of like leaky gut, which you've probably heard of before, is to actually have a fasting window. So not eating late into the night, because there's certain bacteria in our gut that sort of repair the epithelial lining on the intestine. So if you think about just wear and tear in general, do you remember that? Did you hear from Tim Spector?
Yeah, so like a scavenger cell that goes around and sort of cleans up. And if we're constantly in a fed state, it doesn't act.
It doesn't act. Yeah. So that's another way. So that by having leaky gut, it allows these bacteria from our gut to penetrate through the cells into the bloodstream, and then it can cause disease, like you say. But having that window may alleviate that. And then also, the last thing that I wanted to discuss in terms of the gut microbiome is the use of antibiotics, because we actually did discuss this week, didn't we? So obviously antibiotics need to be used when they're needed. So if you have a bacterial infection and it needs to be treated with an antibiotic, then we need to use it. However, we need to be more mindful about what we're using antibiotics for and the frequency of use. We discussed, didn't we, this week, that we use antibiotics for acne. And in a lot of cases, in people that I know anyway, it's very mild. So acne can become inflamed and it can become infected, so it may need treatment with an antibiotic. However, we give prophylactic doses of antibiotics for the treatment of acne.
We do.
if we do that, if you think about, in our guts there are bacteria, antibiotics don't differentiate between, the type of bacteria. If it's a bacteria that is susceptible to that antibiotic, then it will, destroy it.
Upon it.
Yeah, and so we just need to be mindful of that, because I think, again, I think there's studies that show that a less diverse gut microbiome can also increase the risk of skin conditions, and it can come out in your skin. And so if you're killing off the gut bacteria, your acne potentially then may get worse, even though you're trying to make it better in the short term. So
it's definitely an area of science that's going to release all different pockets of information as we go along.
Yeah.
It's a big part.
Yeah.
So the big change for us going forward is we're going to increase the amount of plants within our diet.
Yeah.
Anyone at home who is listening, we advise to do the same, and that does include spices, which people normally forget, and nuts. If you haven't done this before and you eat a particularly bland or beige diet, do it slowly, because otherwise you'll be in the bathroom all the time.
Yeah.
And it will be unpleasant. But that's definitely something we're going to do, and see if that, again, we can't monitor these in isolation, because there's going to be things that happen over the next 3 months, such as different stresses with work, maybe. We don't know what's going to happen with our health acutely. Do we become unwell? So hopefully it doesn't do that, and then we can sort of mark it off as if it's a beneficial thing for us or not.
Yeah.
One thing we're not so much changing is saturated fatty acid consumption, because we did look at our saturated fats on a daily basis, and we're averaging around, I'd say, 14 to 20 grams a day. And they do advise, depending on which dietary guidelines you look at, less than 10% of your total energy intake to come from saturated fats.
Yeah.
And there has been studies that have linked it to increased ApoB, LDL cholesterol concentration, and it's because it's formed within certain pathways, palmitic acid, palmitoyl-CoA. There are pathways that do lead to an increase in cholesterol production, and then that will increase the output by ApoB. In terms of what we're doing going forward, I don't think we need to change it.
No.
I think we would literally be fasting all the time. Because of the things that we do have. The saturated fatty acids, for example, come from avocados, which is our biggest burden.
Yeah.
But that also contains polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats, which have beneficial cardiac effects, basically. So there are a lot of things to weigh up when you are looking at your own diet.
Yeah.
If you were to have a lot of takeaways, or you have a lot of red meat, then you can consider to remove that. The meat that we have on a daily basis is chicken.
Yeah.
What is that, about 1 gram of saturated fat per 100 grams?
Yeah. We do have red meat, but we probably try and reduce or limit it to once or twice a month, don't we? So obviously over the Christmas period we probably have a little bit more. Maybe. As you do. But yeah, I think again it's about the composition as well, isn't it? So like you say, if people, saturated fat is high in ultra processed foods and takeaway foods that are considered less healthy.
So if you have an avocado, you're more likely to have it with other legumes and healthy foods, maybe lean meats or fishes, whereas ultra processed foods.
Yeah, and so if you are obviously having saturated fat from those sources, then I would reduce it down to as little as you possibly can. But like you say, with us, it's coming from good food sources, whole food sources, so it's very difficult to really decrease the amount of saturated fat that we've got.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to look further into the studies, I have read a few before we've done this podcast today, and they are below. And it was discussing the idea that it lowers your ApoB, which is the particle on top of these atherogenic vesicles, not so much your LDL cholesterol. And the theory behind some of these studies was saying that it doesn't make the small dense ones, which you discussed last week, as being highly atherogenic, because they're more likely to be trapped within the vascular wall.
Yeah.
And they're trying to make these bigger LDL cholesterol, so the concentration doesn't change, but the particle number is. But yeah, I think for us, we don't need to change anything. That's a very low amount in comparison to what we could eat and a lot of what the population are eating.
Yeah.
One thing that we are going to change, I think, is exercise. Now, I did say our exercise hasn't changed for me since I had my blood results, and it hasn't largely. I do attend 6 to 7 days a week. I know some people have a rest day, but we've been pretty consistent. But I think the intensity of our training has changed.
Yeah, it has.
And the consensus is that it doesn't really change ApoB. From the studies I've read, there's ones as early as 2007 where it was based in Oslo. Over a year, there's one in obese women. And they have shown some sort of positive correlation between exercise and ApoB reduction and cardiovascular risk.
Are you going to explain briefly about how that works, or?
I mean, I was just going to go into in terms of how we use energy within our bodies.
Yeah.
So people think that we use glucose as the predominant
Yeah.
energy source, and it's not so much, because it's all dependent on VO2 max, which is your ability to sort of use oxygen and function at certain capacities. Now, until I'd say moderate to intense, you use a lot of fatty acids. Where that comes from could be from the blood for the first mild area, and then I'd say medium intensity, it comes from breaking down fats within your body, and then within your muscle you do have a bit of fat, which it does use. And then when it becomes really intense, you need energy that's on site, so then you become to muscle glycogen breakdown, and basically
then you use carbohydrates at that point when it's higher.
Yeah, I mean, there is a crossover,
Yeah.
obviously, but that's how it's normally used. So the theory behind, if you hit a certain training zone, so zone 2 is known as
the fat burning
zone. It has been for a while, and theoretically it does make sense that if you do increase the amount of fatty acids that you've oxidized for energy, you would then reduce the amount coming out from the liver in the LDL particles, which should reduce your ApoB. I mean, that's the sort of the theory and the consensus that I've taken from them studies. The only problem is all the studies that I've read are in overweight to obese females or men, and they have a baseline of basically inactivity. The diets aren't the best. So is that still compatible to me, where I'm not in that group? Or is that saying, even though they've got a benefit at lower intensity of workouts, that I could apply that to a higher intensity and still get the rewards? I don't know.
I would say though as well that just based on that, it would be good to know our VO2 max, because then we could actually work out what our zone 2 would be and etc., isn't it? And I think we have said for a while that we would like to get our VO2 max checked, but I don't know where you
do it, but not so much the literal sense, because it's so painful, isn't it? But like to know the numbers, definitely.
Because then it would aid. And I think that may be something that if in 3 months' time we come to get our bloods checked and maybe they haven't improved as much as what we would have liked to, then we could go down that route of actually seeing, well, what is our VO2 max? How do we get into that fat burning zone for a lot of the time? Because I think we were just saying this before in terms of the fat burning zone, zone 2, is all of the stuff that you really do outside of the gym. So it's all of like the walk, just like
brisk walking,
or like cleaning the house, or so it's not really in the gym if you're doing. I mean, it could be muscle building, to be fair.
Muscle building is actually around that period anyway, depending on how long your rest periods are. But a lot of training, especially within these studies, it's very subjective. Like I said to you before, we've done a workout. How I do a certain exercise can be completely different to someone else, and how much I put in, because there's this thing called RPE, rate of perceived exertion. It's different on different people. So I'm definitely going to change the intensity of what I work. I'm going to do a couple of strength sessions a week. I haven't really focused on strength for a long time, so I'll do that where I aim towards 6 to 8 reps, give or take, per exercise, and I do normally train to failure or close to failure. And then I'm going to do a couple of training sessions throughout the week where I do more of the muscular endurance. So we done that leg workout the other day, which was painful.
Wow.
So that was a case of, 300 bodyweight squats over a period of time, then all Bulgarian split squats and lunges on top. And that was all within a short period of time, no weight. And I think it's that idea to increase your capacity, increase your lactate threshold, and let's see if this does work. Again, it's quite hard to measure. You can use fitness trackers, again, like we've said, how accurate are they? And does that really relate to how you're perceiving an exercise at that one point? I don't know. But definitely that's something that I'm going to, at least we can hold each other accountable to it in terms of increasing our intensity and working out.
And I think I need to increase my cardiovascular training, because with it being winter, really the cardiovascular training that I was doing was running, and it's not very favourable to go outside when it's freezing or raining like it is now. But I do need to increase that. But again, if it increases my cholesterol, then great, but it's also about increasing my overall health as well. So I definitely will be doing that, and like increasing the strength exercises that I'm doing. I have been doing a lot of yoga and Pilates because of a back injury that I've had, and I think I was saying before that I'm worried to go and do strength training, but I really enjoy doing strength training, and that's where you see the most difference. And even though I'm going to still incorporate yoga and Pilates into my training regime, because one, I enjoy it, and two, it's very beneficial for mobility, for flexibility, and also for muscle building. I need to switch it up a bit, and I need to challenge myself more
But you should just use supported exercises, so like you've done a chest supported row.
Yeah.
It takes your lower back out of it to an extent. It is a bit safer. Again, you don't get the ability to train your lower back, and you don't get the benefits of the accessory muscles, but it's still better than maybe not training at all. So for those who are looking at what training regimes should they do to improve cardiovascular outcomes, I think it's got to be a selection of all of them. So you want to increase your lactate threshold, your VO2 max, so that comes from intense training. It comes from aerobic activity as well. But also you want to do the lower end, which is lower reps, higher weight. So you want to improve your strength. You also need to do mobility. So it's not a one size fits all. You've got to do everything, in my opinion. What you're good at will change. I'm better at strength as opposed to endurance. Yeah. I think I'm probably middle of the ground, to be honest. But there's some things that come easier to me than others. Yeah. And that's something I'm going to work on going forward. Now, the last thing in terms of increasing your cardiovascular, reducing your risk, increasing the benefits from our lifestyle is dietary carbohydrates. Yeah. Now, we did do this calculation. We were having quite low amounts. I think you were averaging, I don't know whether it was 150 to 200 grams a day.
Was it?
I think.
Yeah.
Now, again, I don't think what you're eating is a lot. And in terms of how detrimental is that to your cardiovascular health, comes into, there's another thing that we need to bring into it, and it's glycemic index and glycemic load. Now, I don't think we need to change ours, but
the only thing I would say is that we potentially have a lot of white rice.
Yeah, true.
So I think the only thing that I would change is potentially adding more whole grain rices in, which contains more fibre, and so again it's good for your good microbiome, and then also the glycemic index, which you're going to discuss. So that would be the only thing, but I don't think we should change every single meal to whole grain, because again, variety is the spice of life, and I think that,
And also there was a thing saying that even if you do have white rice, for example, if you have day-old rice, that is actually better for your gut health than freshly cooked rice, because it increases the starch, harder for your body to break down. And there's a common theme with a lot of these foods that are healthy for you is that it's harder for your body to break them down. Yeah. So normally that means it's being utilised within the gut. Yeah. So that's the common theme. Yeah. So brown rice again, I'm presuming it's going to be harder to break down. Yeah. Same with sourdough, for example. Yeah. We have a lot of that. Also, the benefits come from the lactobacillus that have manipulated the glycemic index to some extent. Yeah. Now, glycemic index, for someone who doesn't know, is the ability of a food, carbohydrate mainly, to spike insulin. And the idea is, it was brought out, I think, in the early 80s, 81, by some sort of scientist. And they said, they come up with a list of foods, low, medium and high, and it was mainly for diabetics, so that they could look at foods that they may not need to adjust their insulin dose as radical. Yeah. And radically is what they think. And then I think it might have been in the 90s when something else came out called the glycemic load, because people were focused on, let's say, a bottle of Coke where you have it, it's got a high glycemic index. The ability to spike your insulin is really high. But then if you had, let's say, a packet of rice, the glycemic index, the ability to spike in an acute period is quite low. But then if you have larger volumes of it in a portion, it has the ability, again, this area under the curve to stimulate insulin. So that's where glycemic load comes from. Now, I've not looked fully into how glycemic index, because there wasn't many studies on it, how improving your glycemic index of foods then relates to ApoB production. Yeah. But I'm assuming if you would again reduce the amount of carbohydrates that are spiking insulin, that's going to have a beneficial effect no matter what on your body. Yeah.
And I think the other thing to note as well is that we know that people react differently to different foods as well. So one person's insulin could spike to a certain level with a cake, and then another person's
might be tomatoes.
Yeah. So I think Zoe are doing a lot of work surrounding that, a lot of studies, aren't they? And I think that I think probably in the future that's where sort of nutrition will go. It'll be individualised, won't it? It'll be personalised nutrition. That is where does seem to be going, where people eat sort of what's correct for them.
I think more and more people are becoming aware of how important food is to their lifestyle, and that it isn't just a fuel source, it's more than that. So you discussed earlier on about phytochemicals. It's the non-energy components of food that are more important now than they've ever been. Yeah. and you just don't see it. You just normally see the effects of them not being there in the long term.
Yeah.
But in terms of a carbohydrate point of view, yeah, I think we need to reduce the amount of white rice. I think that's the only thing. I think we did go to white sourdough, did we, at one point, and ciabatta, as opposed to rye?
Which again, like, we don't have that much, but I think it was just creeping up a little bit too much, and especially with you having the genetic form of diabetes, it's only going to be beneficial for you anyway. So yeah, I think definitely doing that. And then also we were having a lot of legumes or like lentils and things like that in place of rice a couple of months ago, whereas we don't have that as much anymore. So even things like having cauliflower rice, I think I made it the other day, and you thought it was rice, like, because it doesn't really taste much different, especially when it's in like a sauce or something. So I mean, you know, again, we don't have that much to warrant changing our diet too drastically, but just doing little things, you know, every now and again will, again, if it doesn't increase your cholesterol, it's going to increase your overall or improve your overall health. And even if it doesn't, then what is the risk versus the benefit? There is no risk to increasing the amount of plants that you get. And okay, if there is no benefit, then there was no risk ever anyway. Do you get what I mean? But there probably is going to be a benefit to just increasing the amount of plants that you have.
If I was a better man, I would say there's a better outcome from it. So. And it does help that you're a good chef. Like when I cook and it comes to spice, I just throw anything in. I mean, sometimes it's hit and miss with my cooking, so that's why you do most of the cooking. But in terms of a summary of what we're going to be doing going forward, like Jess said, we've mainly targeted our cholesterol. Now, all these sorts of changes that we are going to implement are going to benefit you in some sort of way, whether that be cardiovascular health and anything, weight, all these, diabetic health, all these other factors will improve in some way. Yeah. So we're going to increase the amount of plants within our diet again, aim for 30. I don't even know how many we hit.
I think we probably hit about 30. However, the only thing that like I said before, is that it's probably 30 of the same every week. So we could switch that up a little bit.
Well, you did start doing this random vegetable of the week.
Yeah, I did.
I mean, that sounds sad to anyone, but we just go around Costco and just find a random fruit or veg that we've never seen before.
And then I just make a meal with it,
Well, yeah, you would. I wouldn't have a clue what to do with it.
But I think we should start doing that. We did actually buy Tim Spector's book. I mean, you probably tell by now that I'm obsessed with this guy. But I think, you know, I enjoy all the content that he puts out. But no, he's just released a cookbook, which is, I think it's actually it's not just plant-based, but most of the recipes are mainly plant-based vegan recipes. And so we were just trying a new recipe from that, you know, every week, and it was nice, yeah. So probably should do that.
Yeah, I think people have got this fear that plant-based vegan food and vegetarian diets are bland, but if you've got a good chef and you know what they're doing, it's a completely different story, isn't it? It is tasty. It's probably more insightful than... I
think this is the thing that I have discussed on the podcast before, that my taste buds have completely changed since eating more plants, and food tastes now, when it's whole healthy food, it tastes so flavourful. Whereas I think whenever you have ultra processed foods, because of the mouth feel and what it does and the layering and stuff, it's the same. Yeah. You get the same experience almost every time, and it's just a rush, isn't it? A dopamine hit that you're getting with that food, so it's not the same experience. And that's the only way I can describe it, is that it's a completely different experience now, and I can taste more flavours.
But your body's sort of interacting with the food more. It's got to break it down, it's got to chew it, it's got to process it in some way, whereas ultra processed food, it's the body's playing catch up. You've already consumed something before you've recognised what it is. Okay, so we're going to increase the plants. Exercise, we're going to make more intense. So in terms of, we're going to stick to a consistent strength regime, mobility and aerobic capacity. I think that's the big one that we need to improve on. I think the other two were fine, especially if you with mobility. Aerobic capacity needs to increase. It's going to be hard in the winter in the UK. We will do spins, rowing, but definitely something we need to do. Saturated fats still keep at the same level. If we can reduce it any more, that's always a benefit, but I don't think there's much room for that. No. And then in terms of glycemic index, we're going to go for foods that have got more whole grain based, where it's going to take our body longer to process and hopefully reduce any insulin spikes. I think that was quite good.
Yeah, I feel like it was, again, like I said at the beginning, if anyone's actually reached this point, with it being January, all the things that we have discussed, even if you incorporated one thing that we've said, it is going to improve your overall health. But I think the most important thing going into January, and I think we are going to actually go into this maybe in the next podcast, just to like sort of round off the year, is to just if you're wanting to start a lifestyle change, start off slow and then slowly increase and change, you know, things every other week or something like that, and make it a lifestyle change. So don't just go all out in January and like join the gym and be doing 5-6 classes a day or something like that. Something that you're not going to stick to. Try and do it slowly, and even if you might not feel like you're getting anywhere, but in the long run you definitely will if you do it that way. And that's the sort of advice that I would give anybody, because I've done it myself. I was, you know, trying to hit workouts 3-4 times a week, killing myself for literally 2 weeks, and then I'd be dead because it was like so intense, and then wasn't seeing the results. You know, I'd then be really good all week, like Monday to Friday, I'd eat very healthy, and then on the weekend think that I could eat whatever the hell I wanted because it didn't count. And I did that for so many years, and then it wasn't until I made a complete lifestyle change where every single day I do basically the same thing, I'm consistent with it, that I've seen the benefit.
Yeah. Boring becomes fun at one point.
It does,
when it comes to health.
I know it
and
does.
Like Jess just said, with your health you will always find the benefits no matter what time you start and by how much you start impacting it. There's always going to be a beneficial factor to it. But yeah, if you have got this far, thanks for listening, and if you haven't subscribed, whatever platform you're on, please do so, and we'll see you next week.